Chapter 1. It's a hot afternoon near Soledad, California, sometime during the 1930s. Everyone, or nearly everyone, is poor and scrambling around desperately for work, food, and money. We meet Lenny Small and George Milton, two guys who are among the poor and the scrambling. These two are dressed nearly identically, but there the similarities end. George is small and smart, Lenny is huge and mentally slow. We can tell from his dialogue and actions that he's got some major problems. Lenny drops to his knees and drinks from a pool of dirty water, slurping out of it like a horse. George verbally swats him. This is the dynamic of their relationship in a nutshell. Lenny acts like a kid, and George admonishes him like a parent. Make that a parent who swears a lot. George reminds Lenny, and us, about where they are going and why, a ranch where they can buck barley for $50 a month. George also reminds Lenny why they lost their last job, something about a girl with a soft, red dress that Lenny liked to pet the doctor. That is, although technically, yes, the girl was in the dress at the time. This petting is a major problem for Lenny. Lenny likes to pet things a little too hard and a little too long, an activity that keeps resulting in dead rabbits. Lenny and George have an argument over a mouse that Lenny has petted a little too hard and long. Lenny wants to keep the dead mouse in his pocket, but George throws it away. Then they argue about other stuff. Lenny wants ketchup with his supper of beans. George says there isn't any. Lenny threatens to go live by himself in a cave. George says what a great life he could have if Lenny did go off and live in a cave. And now Lenny's feelings are hurt. George makes it up to Lenny by telling him his favorite story, the one where they have their own ranch and Lenny gets to tend and pet rabbits, as long and as hard as he wants. That sounds kind of horrific for the rabbits, actually. George also reminds Lenny to come back to this spot by the river if anything bad happens, which suggests, of course, that something bad most definitely will. Chapter 2. George and Lenny arrive at the new ranch. In the bunkhouse, they meet an old guy named Candy. His name seems especially inappropriate since he is missing a hand, has bristly white whiskers, and an ancient dog that stinks. Candy gives George the lowdown on the ranch. The boss shows up and questions George and Lenny about their work history. George does all the talking, which makes the boss suspicious. He can't understand why George is looking out for Lenny, and, honestly, we're not sure either. George lies and says he and Lenny are cousins, and that they left their last job because it was done. He leaves out that the job ended when Lenny was accused of rape, inappropriate petting. The boss leaves and Candy comes back in with his dog, who used to be a great sheep herder before he got OL. D and Stinky. Excuse us while we take a brief detour into the mid-90s. Okay, back now. Sorry about that. The boss' son comes in. He's a small but cocky tough guy type and immediately sizes up George and Lenny as potential victims. He tries to engage Lenny in an argument, but George interferes. The boss' son basically does the equivalent of lol or the worst. With that parting shot, he leaves. Candy explains things for us. The boss' son, named Curly because he has curly hair, used to be a lightweight fighter and now picks fights with every big guy he meets. He's gotten even worse since he married a tart, who has the eye for every guy on the ranch. We're supposed to believe that Curly is now totally whipped. He's even taken to wearing a glove full of Vaseline to keep his hand soft for his wife. Quote, with that parting shot, Candy leaves. George gives Lenny another piece of fatherly advice: avoid Curly like the plague, unless Curly actually touches him, in which case, kick his butt. And if anything bad happens, Lenny's can go to his safe spot near the river. Speak of bad things, Curly's wife enters the bunkhouse, looking for Curly. Unlike most other characters in the book, Curly's wife has no name, unless you consider Tramp, Lulu, and Jailbait to be names. In that case, this lady's got lots of names. Lenny can't take his eyes off of Curly's wife, and she doesn't make it easy to put his eyes anywhere else, either. Slim, the prince of the ranch, about whom you will hear more later, walks by and sends Curly's wife on her way. Time for another lecture for Lenny's benefit: stay away from this woman. Lenny, with an admirable sense of self-preservation, says that he doesn't like this place, but they've got to stay until they can buy a ranch of their own. Slim now stands in the doorway. You get the sense that Steinbeck has a little bit of a man crush on Slim. He's practical, tough as nails, understanding, highly skilled at his job, cool and calm, and still humble. Heck, we have a bit of a crush on him. In comes another visitor, Carlson, who asks Slim about his new litter of puppies. Maybe Slim could give one of these puppies to Candy as a replacement for his ancient dog, which stinks so bad it deserves to be shot. According to Carlson, at the mention of the word puppy, Lenny starts wriggling with pleasure. Pure petting pleasure. If Lenny had a tumbler, it would totally look like this. Curly shows up at the door. Don't these people do any work? Looking for, you guessed it, his wife. He and George snark at each other a little, but no one whips out any roundhouse punches. Not yet, at least. The dinner bell rings. Thank goodness. Chapter 3. New BFFs. Slim and George walk into the bunkhouse together. George thanks Slim for Lenny's new puppy. Slim asks the question that's on everyone's mind, wanting to know why a cuckoo, like Lenny, and a smart little guy, like George, are traveling around together. Because Slim is a good guy, George tells him everything, that George knew Lenny's Aunt Clara, that he used to tease Lenny mercilessly until he realized how loyal Lenny was to him, that Lenny isn't exactly crazy, just dumb, that he's gotten used to Lenny's annoying ways, and that he's seen guys that go around by themselves and those guys get lonely and mean. So he and Lenny stick together. George also tells Slim what happened in Weed with the girl in the red dress. She got frightened of Lenny's petting, cried rape, and he and Lenny had to run for their lives, or at least run and hide in a muddy ditch for a while. Slim decides that Lenny ain't mean, he's G's like a kid. If by kid, you mean a very large and enormously powerful, full-grown man with a tendency to pet things to death. Carlson comes in and complains again about the smell wafting off of Candy's dog and offers to shoot the creature with his trusty Luger. Candy is miserable, since loves his old companion and can't bear the thought of killing him. Slim, surprisingly, sides with Carlson. He'd want to be shot if he were old and crippled. Since Slim has handed down his verdict, the dog is as good as dead. Candy lies down on his bed and stares up at the ceiling, while Carlson takes his gun and the dog outside. George pretends to play cards. All is quiet and hideously tense in the bunkhouse. Finally, a shot is heard in the distance, and Candy turns his face to the wall. Crooks pokes his head in the bunkhouse. We haven't met Crook before. He takes care of all the horses and he gets his very own private room. Lucky dog. Oh, wait, he has to live by himself because he's black, and black people aren't allowed to live with white people. Never mind. Crooks tells Slim that Lenny is hanging out in the barn petting the puppies too much. That is actually not a euphemism. Oh, Slim goes to take a look. Whit, another ranch hand, engages George in conversation about Curly's wife, who he says is a Lulu. They agree that Curly has yellow jackets in his drawers, and his pants is just crawlin' with ants, all of which apparently means that Curly's wife's crazy sexuality has pumped up Curly's sexuality. George wisely observes that Curly's wife is gonna make a mess. All this talk about sex leads Whit to invite George along on the Saturday night trip to the local brothel. George says, $2.50 is a bit rich for his blood. Sure, Whit says, you can get it cheaper at Clara's brothel, but Susie's house is cleaner and Susie tells better jokes. Since George apparently loves a madam with a sense of humor, he's swayed by these selling points. And then a whole bunch of people come in, Lenny, Carlson, tactlessly cleaning his gun, and Curly, looking for Mrs. Curly. He hears that Slim is out in the barn and immediately fills in, having sex with my wife, and storms off. Whit and Carlson follow, excited for a fight. George tells Lenny he'd take a good brothel over jail bait any day, at least with a brothel you know ahead of time what you're getting and how much it's going to set you back. We get the feeling that jail bait means any woman who doesn't post her price clearly. All this talk of sex is boring Lenny, who begs to hear the Dream Farm story again. George complies. Candy overhears this discussion and offers to chip in $300 if they'll let him live at the farm, too. The three of them imagine what life will be like once they have a place of their own. George and Candy are particularly excited about being able to go where they want, when they want. Lenny is mostly stoked about the rabbits and other garden bits. At this point, Candy admits that he should have shot his dog himself. All the other guys come back in, and the testosterone in the bunkhouse reaches critical mass. Slim is ticked at Curly for bugging him about his wife. Carlson calls Curly a coward. Curly starts punching Lenny, who does nothing. Until George yells at Lenny to get I'm. In a move that rivals Bruce Lee, Lenny grabs Curly's hand as it's coming toward his face, and essentially crushes it completely. Carlson gets ready to cart Curly off to the doctor, and Slim shuts the situation down. He tells Curly to say that he got his hand caught in a machine. If he tries to get Lenny fired, Slim will tell everyone what really happened. Moaning and crying, Curly agrees. Lenny is scared that, because he has done a bad thing, George will no longer let him tend the rabbits. No, George reassures him, any future rabbits are his to tend, and tells him to go wash the blood off. Chapter 4. Crooks is sitting in his room when Lenny comes by. They're alone, because everyone else has gone off to Susie's clean and comedic house of ill repute. Lenny, revealing his secret-keeping capabilities, immediately tells Crooks about the Dream Farm. You'd think that Crooks would be sympathetic, because he's kind of an outcast, too. But you'd be wrong. Loneliness has made him hostile, and he starts taking out his anger on Lenny by insinuating that George may never come back. Lenny freaks out and gets mad. Crooks sees Lenny towering over him and retracts his comment. Lenny calms down. Phew, that was close. Somehow, Crooks decides this is the perfect moment for a speech about how every guy needs another guy to talk to. Evidently Candy didn't go to Susie's, either, because he comes in now to talk about the farm they're supposedly getting. Hey, Crooks wants to be part of this plan. Just as they're doing some really nice male bonding, Curly's wife appears in the doorway. They left all the weak ones here, she says, in a surprising burst of cruel insight. Curly's wife reveals she's lonely and wants someone to talk to, even if it is a nigger and a dum-dum and a lousy old sheep. The nigger, dum-dum, and sheep just want her to leave, thanks. Curly's wife asks Lenny how he got the bruises on his face. Crooks tells her again to leave, and she threatens to have Crooks lynched. The men return from Susie's brothel $2.50 poorer. When George comes in and Candy admits that they've told Crooks about the farm, George is not happy. Nah, man, Crooks was just joking. He retreats once again into the sadness and safety of his solitary life. Chapter 5. Lenny is alone in the barn, petting a puppy that he has obviously petted a little too long and hard, and he can't make up his mind about it. First, he covers the dead puppy up with hay. Next, he flings the dead puppy across the barn. We're not sure he's all that concerned about the dead puppy, actually. Instead, he's worried that George might not let him tend to the rabbits of the dream farm. Curly's wife, who sashays in, has some advice: don't feel bad because the pup was just a mutt, and mutts are aplenty in the world. She confides in Lenny, telling him that she could have been a famous movie star, but the world conspired against her and that's why she's ended in a barn with a dumb D. And a dead dog. Lenny does a little confiding of his own. He got into this trouble because he likes to pet soft things. Says Curly's wife. Her hair is soft. So, Lenny pets Curly's wife's hair. Can you guess where this is going? He pets a little too long and hard, and breaks her neck. Now Lenny has something new to cover with hay. This is bad. So bad, that now George really might not let him tend the rabbits. He remembers George's instruction about where to go in case things get bad. So he goes, taking the dead puppy with him. When Candy comes into the barn and sees Curly's wife, he runs to find George. What to do? They both know that they should turn Lenny in, but he'll be locked up and treated miserably if they do. On the other hand, Curly will torture and kill Lenny if he finds him. Says Candy, does this mean they can't have their farm? Pretty much. George says that he thinks he knew all along that they'd never really get a farm, but he tried to believe because Lenny liked to hear about it. Now that there's no dream to believe in, George figures that he'll be just like the other ranch hands, spending all his time and money on booze and bad women. Candy is surprised by all this, since Lenny really didn't seem like a bad guy. No, says George. Lenny didn't kill her out of meanness, he never did anything from meanness. Time for a plan. If he tells the guys what happened to Curly's wife, they might suspect he was in on it. Instead, he'll run off to the bunkhouse, and Candy can come running in a minute later with news of Curly's dead wife. When Candy comes in, George will be surprised that the woman is dead. Candy, left alone with Curly's dead wife, takes a minute to yell at her for being the source of all their troubles. As Candy leaves for the bunkhouse to tell the guys what he's found, he's teary. Not for the dead girl. For the lost dream. All the men come in to look at the dead woman, scuffing their boots in the straw. Curly says the big son of a bitch has done this and he intends to shoot him right in the guts. Curly and Carlson run out of the barn to round up guns and men and go in search of the guts. Meanwhile, Slim says quietly to George that given the way Curly's wife's neck is broken, Lenny could well have done it. George is quiet, and Slim reminds him vaguely about the time in weed George had described earlier. With his hat pulled down low over his eyes, George says nothing. Slim sighs and says he guesses they've got to go get Lenny now. He seems sorry things have to shake out this way. George trickily tells the men that Lenny probably went south. Yup, definitely south. Maybe, he says to Slim, they could just bring Lenny back, so he can be locked up rather than murdered by a two-bit no-good son of a ranch owner. George promises Lenny was nuts and didn't do the murder out of meanness. Maybe, if only they could keep Curly off the warpath. But locked up is no way for a man to live either. Carlson breaks up the powwow by announcing that his Luger has been stolen and that Lenny must have taken it. Luckily, Curly has a gun, and Carlson can take Crook's gun. Phew, the manhunt is still on. Curly tells Carlson to shoot Lenny in the guts as soon as he sees him, tells Whit to go to Soledad and get the deputy sheriff, and tells George to join the search party for Lenny. He's not interested in hearing about how Lenny is nuts and didn't mean to do it. Slim, looking down at the dead body, suggests perhaps Curly should stay with his dead wife and cool off. Nope, he's hell-bent on shooting Lenny himself, even if he's only got one good hand. And George had better join the hunting party, or everyone might start thinking that he had something to do with it. Chapter 6. Lenny sits by the deep pool near the river, waiting for George and patting himself on the back a little for remembering that he was supposed to wait there. He's thinking about how much trouble he causes George, saying, if George don't want me, I'll go away. I'll go away. Just then, who should he conjure out of the dark corners of his dull mind but his dead Aunt Clara? Aunt Clara lights into Lenny. She accuses him of never thinking of George, even though George is always so nice to him. Nice activities include saving him the bigger piece of pie and giving him all the ketchup, when there is any. Aunt Clara gets grumpier, listing off all the boozing and women George could have had without Lenny. While Lenny whines that he's always trying, Aunt Clara announces he never had any intention of leaving George the hell alone. Aunt Clara swears a surprising amount. Her grammar also leaves something to be desired. Then, Aunt Clara disappears, only to be replaced by a very large and angry rabbit that, not surprisingly, also has Lenny's voice. If you thought the dead ant was bad, the scary, mind-reading rabbit reaches into Lenny and hits him where it hurts. It scoffs at Lenny's hope to tend to rabbits. He ain't fit to lick the boots of no rabbit. Quote, Lenny, rather than pointing out that rabbits don't tend to wear boots, just waits for more. The rabbit suggests that George will beat Lenny with a stick and then leave Lenny. He's gonna leave you, ya crazy bastard. He's gonna leave ya all alone. As Lenny covers his ears in agony and cries out for George, the rabbit, according to the narrator, scuttles back into Lenny's brain, and George finally appears from the brush. Lenny is thrilled to see George and begs him to give him hell, so that things can get back to normal. George is strangely quiet even when Lenny tells him that he has done yet another bad thing. When George refuses to give him hell, Lenny asks George to tell him the dream farm story again. George takes out Carlson's Luger and unsnaps the safety. He can hear Curly and the other men getting closer. As George tells the story, Lenny adds his usual details about tending rabbits and living off the fat of the land. George tells Lenny to look across the river while he narrates, like a kid saying, "You forgot the part when the alien space monsters come." As George is readying his courage, Lenny says, "Please do it now. Please get that place now." George agrees they've got to do it now, and as Lenny continues to look over the bank, envisioning the farm, George puts a gun to the back of Lenny's head and pulls the trigger. Lenny lies still in the sand, without quivering, dead. Steinbeck. Could you be any more depressing? The other men hear the shot and come running. They think that Lenny had Carlson's gun and that George wrestled it away from him. But Slim understands. He comes over to George quietly and sits close to him, saying simply, "Never you mind, a guy got to sometimes." As the other men probe George for the nasty details, Slim intervenes. He tells George the two of them should go for a drink, and as he helps him up adds, "You hadda, George. I swear you hadda. Come on with me." The two leave. Carlson looks at the others and says, "Now what the hell y'all suppose is eating them two